I do unironically think that Cenk and Anna are some of the most harmful people spreading transphobic stuff right now, specifically because they are telling their audience of people who would otherwise be allies that the smart strategy is to throw trans people under the bus. That the smart strategy is to distance yourself from trans people at the time where trans people are most being threatened. And so that, to me, actually makes them more dangerous than people like Matt Walsh, because Matt Walsh, like his followers of unhinged freaks, were always going to be exactly that, right? Like, but Anna and Cenk are actively taking people who would otherwise be supportive and literally sending them to my comments section to harass me, right?
How's it going? How are you doing?
It's going great. I'm doing well. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, pleasure to finally have you on the show. A lot of people have been requesting that I interview in general, not just related to the fact that you are now, the news of the last couple weeks, but just in general, people people are big fans and they wanted to see you on the show.
Yeah, well, that's fun. It's always fun to be the main character of the internet. I personally love the random DMs and YouTube comments and like all that like weird hatred I get. Getting called unhinged on Twitter really, I think, set people off, and they ran with that. But you know, it's okay. Maybe I am a little unhinged.
I'm genuinely, I'm so sorry. When I saw that, I was like, what the fuck? How, like, I obviously we'll get into it. But that blew my mind. I couldn't believe not only was Jake doing that, but like doing that to like a former employee and like, you know, a prominent trans employee who's recently in the centerpiece of this culture war, talking out against all of this. You know, that was like, I don't know, really shitty to see.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty wild too. Like, I don't know. Like, I guess like it's kind of a weird feeling, but like ultimately I didn't hold too much stake in it. Like I literally was just spending like the weekend like you know, I was just hanging out with my girlfriend all week long last week, and I was
Hell yeah.
like goofing around like shit posting on the internet. So like I don't know. I kind of like said my piece with the video, and I
Yeah.
wasn't going to dive into it cuz I kind of figured that they were going to post through it, and I'm like, I'm not going to be part of a back and forth posting through all this. I said what I needed to say. And I'm just going to be normal about this moving forward, and you know, the people that heard it, that needed to hear it, heard it. And like the people who don't tolerate people like Jesse Singal or like his defenders, or the people who don't want to deal with like people asking asking questions about hormones for trans youth or trans people in sports, um heard it and know what's up. And you know, obviously there's going to be a bunch of people mad at me for like dividing the left or whatever, but like, you know, actually as a trans woman, I'm biased, and I think that trans people should be equal participants in society, and that if that's dividing anybody in any way, shape, or form, that's their fault and not mine.
But I was told they were just asking questions. You know, why won't anyone have the debate? You know, are we not going to allow the marketplace of ideas to determine what civil rights everyone should have? Isn't that how this
Yeah,
works?
that's right. Yeah, yeah, for
um
real though.
all right, well, before I begin asking you all of the pressing questions and demanding the hot tea that everyone on the internet is so thirsty for, do you want to please plug where people can find you, because I know you're now moving from one media empire to another, and how can you build said media empire?
Yeah, exactly. So Benny.gay on Twitch now, which
Hell
is
yeah.
so much easier to say
Oh,
than
so
Bleep
easy.
Blomp Ben. Like
Yeah.
it's so much. I've seen you stumble over it. I've had Lucid stumble over. Everybody.
I've definitely tongue twisted. When you used to raid me back in the day, I was like, oh, hey, nice to see you. Bleep, blop, blap, blap. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm mispronouncing that.
Yeah, I think Benny.gay is a lot easier.
Benny.k is awesome. Yeah, I'm very happy for you.
um, Yeah, and that's where I'm at that on Blue Sky as well, which is kind of like my main posting place. Which like I get like Blue Sky's not as big, so like technically I have like less followers on Blue Sky, but it just hits different. You know
I
what
was
I
gonna
mean?
say I agree
Like
100%. Like one like on a skeet is equal to like 1,000 right now on Hitler's bunker Twitter. You know, like that whole like
yeah,
I see the numbers, but I was like, how many people on Blue Sky liked what I said? Oh, neat. Yeah, I feel like validated.
No, for real though. And like honestly, I'm just glad that here people are like here for like my goblin nonsense because like straight up it's wild. Being in the top 200 on a social media website is so weird and like,
You're in the top
um
200? What?
oh yeah, yeah. I'm
That's
like
wild.
I'm like I'm like one of the biggest accounts and it's so trippy because like, I'm like one of like the biggest like horny shit posters on the site, right?
Yeah.
And so I am like a magnet for like the weirdest people that show up. They'll like see my account right away. It'll be like recommended to them or whatever. And then
Oh, you mean
like
the
I don't
AI
know.
driving them there?
Like, yeah, yeah. Because like I'll get put on people's recommended all the time. So like I literally noticed in the past week, I'm like, where did all these like cis men come from? Like all of a sudden on Blue Sky. Like, okay, that's
the in
happening.
the invite codes are there, you know?
Yeah. So at Bennie.gay on Blue Sky, Bennie.gay on Twitch, Benny Carollo on YouTube. And that's kind of it. Those are kind of like the things that I'm doing. Um, and those are really the ways to find me. So it's kind of like really since I'm done with TYT, I'm just doing more of the same things that I was doing outside of TYT.
I guess I should start there then. How did you first get involved with TYT? What was your entry point into working on the network?
Uh, yeah, I mean it was through streaming, right? So it was like had been streaming on Twitch for like a little over a year at that point. And they were doing this like Twitch pitch like competition thing of like, oh, like pitch a show to like TYT. And at that point, like I hadn't been watching like a ton of TYT's content in a while, but I like low key working at TYT was always like a dream job for me, right? Because like I was a bit of a lib, back in the day, and like I was like, oh yeah, TYT, that's like super great. Um, and then like I kind of like stopped being able to pay attention to them when I like started running like political campaigns and like, was finishing my master's degree and all those things, right? So I kind of like disconnected from a little bit. Then I started streaming and I found out TYT was doing the Switch bitch thing, and I'm like still like, oh yeah, yo, I remember watching like TYT back in like college and stuff and cool. Like that's let's go. And so I put my like little promotion video forward. I was like, let's heckin' go, TYT, this is great. And that's kind of how I got started. I ended up me and Ravana ended up like winning that competition. It was like a tie or whatever.
Nice.
And we both started our own little Twitch exclusives. Um, and it was pretty great. Like I don't know, like doing Galaxy Brain was pretty wild. Which was like the 2 hour show I did on Twitch on their network.
That's really cool.
Because like I mean the one thing I will say is that I did have like complete editorial freedom and that was fun.
So how did that work? Did they ask you specifically, can you craft a show? Are you going to pitch it to them? Or were you basically just like, can you come onto this existing show and make it your own? And how would they direct what you actually could cover? Or not direct,
No,
I
it was
guess.
my show. It
Okay.
was literally just like it was like you get the TYT's Twitch channel for 2 hours.
Cool.
Uh, you're a good streamer. Be a good streamer on our network. That was basically it. And so like I got to cover whatever I wanted to talk about. I could like, I like once again, I was the one building the show. I was like doing all the things just like I would do with my own Twitch channel. And so like it was very much this just it was very much like a lot of just like complete editorial freedom, which was honestly like really, really great. And that's something that I had even when I was doing like the breakdown videos and stuff like that, where it was just like, yeah, I can cover pretty much whatever topics that I like want to. Although that had like its own format.
Yeah, of course. Um, how did you find working there? Did you find that it was like, and I don't know what your relationship was. You don't have to tell me like your contracts or anything, but I just mean your relationship with the rest of the network. Like, did you have to cross pollinate with other shows? Do you have to produce for other shows? Did they ever want you to take over for like other positions as they came along? That kind of stuff.
Um, yeah, I mean, they never really brought me on to like, so like I would guest a lot. I would
Mhm.
guest a lot, but they never really brought me on to like, as like a replacement host or anything like that. It was kind of just very much like, and so like, I don't know, because there were two segments of what I did basically after Galaxy Brain got canceled.
Mhm.
One is just guest appearances on like the big shows. And then the other was like doing like breakdown videos, right? Breakdown videos was really simple. I just had like a small production team. They would pitch stories to me. I would run with whatever stories I want. Um, and then like send them the videos, and like we would chat every once in a while. And then like, you know, being a guest on like the big shows, it was just literally just that, like show up, be a guest, have a little chit chat before, a little chit chat after, and it's just like the hello goodbye that you have like before and after like a show like goes on
Yeah,
the
totally.
air. And like
How,
that was kind of like my interactions with like all the TYT folks.
how did you find just the general atmosphere? Like welcoming, good.
Uh, Pretty welcoming for the most part. Like, I'm gonna be real. Like, most of the folks that like work at TYT are like really great people, right?
That was my
Like,
experience too.
yeah, yeah. So like, I'm not here to be clear. I'm not here to like disparage like all of the random folks that like work at TYT. Like, it's like the overwhelming majority of them, they're like fine and dandy people or whatever. And it like, to be honest, it's kind of hard to get like a complete and total vibe check from somebody that you just like chat with every once in a while. Like, I
Yeah.
do have people like that I was like, I like producers and whatnot that I would definitely chat a lot more with, and you know, vibe a little bit harder, but that's just like humans, you know, like sometimes you just vibe.
Yeah, no, totally, totally. Yeah, I totally agree. Um, so at what point did things like start to turn for you? Was it around the start of kind of like Anna's strange descent, or was it before that?
Okay, so there's like a few weird moments, and like I kind of like, I don't know. I kind of noticed like getting invited onto shows less. On some shows. There were other shows where I was like consistently getting invited like all the time,
Mhm.
right? Like
Were
I
you
mean,
going
you
too
know,
hard?
especially like I don't know if it was like going too hard, like kind of like maybe yes and no. I mean, like I am one of them evil like Marxist Leninists or whatever. And so like like sometimes I got like a disagreement with Cenk on the air once about like why food should be a public utility, right? And like
That's not even a spicy take.
I
It's like,
know, right? It's like
we have the money, we can afford to feed everyone on the planet if we wanted to. It's like, what? Marxism.
yeah.
Are you Stalin? What is this?
Yeah, no, for real though, for real. Like, and so I'm
Wow.
like, yeah, okay, I just okay, like, but like, I genuinely don't know. I'm not like a mind reader or whatever, but like, you know, you notice when you're getting invited onto certain shows less.
Yeah.
And like, and that's like that's kind of like a thing, and it did a little bit, to be honest, coincide with like me coming out as trans, being an estrogen for a while. You know, just to be real, like low key.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then there's like all the arguments about abolition and stuff, and like, but like I did my piece, and I'm like, whatever, like this is what it is. Like, there's one moment on the air with Cenk where like Cenk basically gave me like 3 minutes to ask my opinion on like prison abolition, which was kind of wild because like I'm very much a prison abolitionist, but I
Yeah.
have like 3 minutes to explain the story because he was talking about, oh, what about the victims of crime, and like low key, like straight up, my brother, like my youngest brother, was like literally murdered, right?
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
At least like under like the state law, right? If you give somebody fentanyl in Minnesota, that's murder right there. That's a murder thing, whether it's knowing or unknowing. And we like, and so I did like give the story of like, no, like my brother was like murdered, and we found out that it was probably an accident, and so our choice was like, what, press charges and send some kid to jail for the rest of his life. Like that's like a, like straight up, prisons are torture factories, right? That's
Mhm.
literally what they are. They are just like torture factories. You put people in there and you make them miserable for years and years and years. It literally ruins their life. That would not in a million years bring my brother back, right? Like that wouldn't do anything to make my life any better. And so, but
Yeah.
like I have to like explain that in like 3 minutes of like, hey, uh, you know,
No,
like
condense these highly charged topics that you have a lot of personal experience with directly into like a sound bite. How do you do it as a sound bite, you know?
yeah, no, and so like, you know, but so I don't know, it's just kind of stuff like that where it's like pushing back and be like, no, no,
Mhm,
prison abolition is actually pretty cool, and
mhm.
like, and that's kind of one of the things that I think like people kind of like struggle with me sometimes, is how normal I am as like one of those evil transgender communists.
The
Where it's
ones we're
just
all
like,
warned
no.
about.
Yeah, yeah. And so like, but like I don't know. I all that is to say, I guess I kind of like, there was kind of like weird moments where I'm like, okay, whatever. This is a weird, it's like sort of like reactionary take that's just kind of like instinctual, but I'm not gonna like sit on it for too long. Like the real moment that like stressed me out, where I'm like, okay, now I'm actually bugged out about this, was like Anna's tweet about like I don't want to be called a birthing person. And it's like, okay, cool. So we're just gonna do the J.K. Rowling thing, huh?
Yeah,
Um,
I thought the same
like,
thing. I was like, no, this is the British technique. This is like gender critical shit, where all of a sudden you got to play defense, you know, and it works. It works so good in the UK. And everyone's constantly just like, oh, well, no, it's not that we're trying to erase you as a woman. It's that there's more language. There's inclusive language. It's too late. Already lost the debate.
yeah. Yeah, no, for real. And like at that point, like, like and there's so many layers to it. And like that's where like it's kind of funny though, because like I ended up like like I met a couple of my partners at about the time when that started. So
Oh, nice.
like our relationships literally have been like months of like me like, okay, at what point is this bad enough that I need to leave? Right? Because like
Yeah.
I know they kinda act like this was like a all of a sudden decision, which I guess from their perspective, it kinda was. Like, I pushed back a little bit, I sent them some DMs, right? I had the phone call with Cenk, and I'm like, "Hey, what are you doing? What's going on here?" I pushed back on Twitter, all these things.
What was the
Um,
response?
like, I kinda talked about it in the video, but, like, straight up, no response on Twitter. Like, if I'm, like, saying things on Twitter, like, they're just like, "No, I'm not gonna engage with that. I'm gonna find the very obvious fake trans account on
Yeah,
that some 4chaner
every
made
time.
and
Yeah,
respond to that one."
yeah.
Uh, can't respond to the good faith ones because,
No.
like, you know, like
That's no, but that's so true. I saw Aaron Reed posted this whole thing where it's like, can you please explain why organizations like the Endocrine Society have released statements that say that puberty blockers are completely safe for trans children to take? They've been given to cis children for decades. They're FDA approved. Why would you say? And like, no response. No response to the good faith. Like, clearly, she had put in her homework and all that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah. No, seriously. And like just no response for anything like that. And so like that was just kind of frustrating. I didn't like when I sent Anna like a DM, and this was over I think I sent Anna a DM in response to her claiming on the air that trans children or there's children were being given hormone replacement therapy because doctors were afraid of being called transphobic, right? And I'm pretty sure that was when I sent her a DM and was like,
Is that one
do you
still
have
up?
any evidence of this happening? Like, do you have
Is
any evidence of this happening?
Did she delete that tweet or is that one still up? I don't think I
No,
even
that
knew about
wasn't a
that one.
tweet. That was on the air, right? So like because so
Oh, okay.
yeah, like because basically, like I mean, I'm the trans person that works at TYT, right? At
Right.
that point, I'm the trans
Yeah.
person that works at TYT. Any TYT host that said anything about trans people, it would be clipped and shipped. It would be on like not even because I wouldn't ask for it. Like I wasn't asking to be like keep an eye on TYT. It's just
Yeah.
like people are gonna be like, "Hey, Ben, what the hell?" Like,
I mean, do you feel like that is like othering to constantly be like, you're supposed to have an opinion on this, or you should know about this, or you should be the one to speak about this?
yes and no. I don't know. I have like weird mixed feelings about it. Like I have
Mm.
weird mixed feelings about it. Because on one hand, it's like, look, I'm just a trans person that works at TYT. At that point, I'm like, I'm just a trans person that works at TYT. I'm not like, you know, um I can't control everybody's behavior, and
Right.
it is I think wrong to put any sort of blame on me for that, which I guess maybe that but that's like a whole thing, right? If a marginalized person is part of some sort of thing and their coworkers are being crummy in one way or another, it is just wrong to blame them for their coworkers behavior, right? But also at the same time, I did like seeing what they were up to, because to be entirely honest, um to a certain extent, me being there on the network is to a certain degree a tacit endorsement of the things that they're doing and saying, right? Because my presence there makes it appear as though it is like this trans friendly, like welcoming space and stuff like that. And that can be the wrong impression to give sometimes, right? That's why I decided to leave, because I'm like, I cannot be affiliated with people that are saying things like this. And I
Clean
want to
up your
make it
room.
clear that there is a reason why there are not trans people on the air at TYT, right? Like, and so that was kind of like the statement that I wanted to make, because it just like that's just one of those things, That's just one of those things that like I think really, really was like a big sticking point for me. So I did want to see what they were saying, because I wanted to see like how far they were going, and like it was like, and that's why it was this long process of like, okay, where's the line, right? Like where's the line of like, this is just getting to the point where they're being harmful to a point where my presence there is no longer positive representation for the trans community.
That's completely fair, especially for the way that like I think Anna was given so much good faith throughout this entire process by colleagues, friends, people who respect her, in ways that, like, you know, the criticism that everyone just went with extremism or extreme ideology, or you all have to, it's all or nothing, you have to believe all the rules, you can't criticize them or have a debate, right? If anything, it was like, these are specific takes, very specific takes and specific criticisms of those specific takes, and you keep doubling down and tripling down, and now you're talking about fucking Jesse Singal, right? Of all people, someone who at this point has been pretty thoroughly debunked for repeating once again, doubling and tripling down when exposed, when called out, when like, you know, shown to be a grifter. That was one of the worst parts of the whole thing.
I mean, that's literally like, that's what gave me the energy throughout that video, to be entirely honest. Like, straight up seeing like Anna Kasparian's tweets about like, oh no, I think Jesse Singal isn't transphobic. That was the like, okay, as soon as I wake up in the morning, I'm recording this video and I'm not stepping away from my computer until it's published on YouTube. Like, that was very much like, and I literally spent all morning doing that, like an hour of recording, like 4 hours of editing, and then I'm like, oh shit, I haven't eaten breakfast yet. Like,
Oh, totally been
you
there.
know,
Yeah.
like that's what it was, because it was like, oh no, so you're just going after trans kids now at this point. And when she said that she's been listening to Jesse Singal, or like been reading his Substack or whatever for like a year now, it's like, oh, now I see where this is all coming from, right? Like, oh no, now this makes like total perfect sense. And it also makes total perfect sense, like, why she wouldn't reply to the DM that I sent her, like, when I was like, hey, where'd you get this information? Because of course I'm the trans person. I couldn't possibly be any person that has like any field of expertise or like even like knowledge about like hormones or anything like that, you know, and like have like some potential insight about like what is actually going on in the world.
Why? Let's see. This is one of the things that honestly, like, it really bugged me, because if they had you as an accessible member of the staff, why not talk to you, right? Like, why go on the air and spout unscientific nonsense about puberty blockers and stuff like that that only serves the far right, when there's clearly someone who knows a lot more about this issue, right? Like, directly accessible to you.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of that is just like the because like there's obviously different layers of transphobia, right? There's obviously different layers of transphobia, right? Um, and there's that baseline layer of like, you know, once you're a trans person, that's like the only thing that you are, right? So like my 4 degrees, all of my experience running political campaigns, my experience that I had in the military, which I'm not proud of, but like I think gives me insight about imperialism and all those things, right? Just kind of like vanishes, you know? It just kind of like vanishes, and then all of a sudden it just turns into, oh no, you're the trans person, and you talk about trans stuff. Um and so there's
Or
definitely, I
trans
feel like,
activist is like the new
yeah,
one now.
exactly. I'm one of those extreme trans rights activists, which is funny because like I wouldn't even consider myself an activist, right? Like, because like the thing is, like I've done activist work before, right? I've done like different legislative work, like I've got like bills passed. I've like done like mutual aid work before, right? I've done like lots of different on the ground activism. Um, but like low key, I haven't been like involved in stuff like that really since like my brother died. I'm kind of like pulled away and mostly just been like this online person just doing the news, right? And it's so I talk a lot about trans issues because Republicans are like attacking trans people like constantly. And so you just kind of have to talk about it if you're being a responsible news person
Mhm.
to a certain degree. But I wouldn't call myself an activist in any way, shape, or form. I feel like that's claiming a title that I really haven't earned, you know, at least not in like my recent things that I have done. Um, and so like that's kind of just like I guess my random aside on like the notion of being like an activist or whatever. But in the eyes of, you know, like people like Cenk and Anna, like if you're a trans person and you're talking about why a genocide against trans people is bad, then by definition you're a trans rights activist. And like, you know,
With extremist positions, genocide
yeah,
bad.
yeah, very extreme stuff right here we're talking about, you know. Um Like,
How did you feel the backlash was once it all happened? Did TYT reach out to you? Did you? And by the way, if I'm overstepping my bounds in any question, just let me know, and just always feel free to be like, oh, I don't feel comfortable answering that. Like totally, I'll move beyond it. But yeah,
um, I I didn't receive like any I didn't receive any personal response from anybody at TYT that wasn't overtly supportive, right? Is I guess all I will say, right?
that's really good.
Um,
That's really good to hear.
yeah,
Very wholesome.
um, yeah. So obviously, like Cenk and Anna kind of like did this weird thing of like on the first day they were like, "Oh, I don't hold anything against Benny," like, but then they kind of also were like, "Ah, Benny's unhinged," and it's like, okay, sure, dude. Like, you do you, man. Like, okay, man.
Yeah,
Like, that's right.
that
Yeah.
was so wild. Well, I mean, to be fair, he was tweeting through it for like 2 or 3 days straight or whatever. At that point, I was just like every single time it would be like the extremists on the right and the extremists on the left are the same, asking you to be ideologically pure or weird thing. And saying that you were too pure for the network. I was like, too pure for the net. The pushback you were getting is so friendly and mild, and it's about basic understanding of the science behind something that is determining healthcare for other people. Like you would think at the base levels, you would just like, be like, oh, okay, well, this is not just like a debate topic like everything else. Like, oh, we got a marketplace of ideas. This one, I don't know. Sorry, I'm rambling, but
No,
um,
I think what set him off was like I did use the word evil, which was pretty much the strongest language that I used in that video.
yeah,
And that was in specific reference to the things that had been said about like healthcare for trans youth and like the doubts, right? That wasn't even like a complete like character judgment on like Jank or Anna. That was literally just, hey, spreading doubts about hormones for trans youth, I think is evil actually. Like straight up, in a sense. I mean, no, literally, it's advocacy of like the torture of children, right? When
yeah,
you're like, no, we know what medical care they need. The medical associate, like all of the big medical organizations, we know exactly what these kids need, right? And I'm going to actively spread doubts about what their medical needs are in order to what? Incentivize people denying healthcare to children. And like, I think that denying healthcare to children is something that definitely counts as torture in my book. And so, yeah, I think it's evil to spread doubts about proven science and medical care in a way that harms children.
I would agree.
So I think that's a fair assessment of those particular words and things that they were actively
Not a
doing.
spicy
And
take. Not
so,
a spicy take.
yeah.
And again, that's totally different than being like you are fundamentally evil fascists and transphobes. Like I saw the pushback against you that was coming from people like Ben Burgess now, trying to do this game where it's like we probably disagree on 2% of issues. Like I keep saying this, like, why are we throwing away Anna or throwing away TYT and Cenk when we only disagree on 2% of issues? Like I don't know if there's a magic number to this, but I can point towards take now after take now after take now after take now to again promoting someone like Jesse Singal of all figures. That is like certainly not someone who's like, oh, this is a milquetoast fence sitter that we're kind of trying to figure out. This is someone who has his own page on Glad. There's a Jesse Singal page on Glad. Like he's a motherfucking
Yeah.
transphobe. He's a piece of shit.
No, for real. And like we don't disagree on 2% of issues. I think in a way we disagree on 100% of issues, right? Especially like I don't get me started on like I kind of like there's a lot of things that I have to say about Ben Burgess. I've never been a fan of his. I think he's always been kind of like really crummy, to be entirely honest. Like, especially, I mean, look, if you want a guy who like if you want like your archetypal like cis het white guy talking about leftist politics and somehow managing to like avoid any discussion about how marginalized people are treated or need to be censored in any type of like leftist movement, that's Ben Burgess for you. So if you're like if you're white and you don't want to acknowledge the existence of marginalized people, Ben Burgess is the perfect guy for you. Congratulations. Like like but like no, I think here's the sense in which I think we disagree on 100% of issues in a way, right? Because like look, as a trans woman, I know when you think that I'm just a gay man playing dress up, right? I know, right? Trans women, we know when you think we're just gay men playing dress up. And if that's where you're at, then we disagree on 100% of things. Because if like I'm saying something and you're hearing this as this is a gay man playing dress up, telling me something, then you have missed 100% of what I'm saying, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're not understanding who the messenger is. You're not understanding what the message is for, and you've entirely missed the point. So yeah, like if you're not acknowledging who I am as a person, even if you're outwardly saying the right words, but the way that you're like going about talking about things, and that's one of those things with like, you know, Cenk when he was talking about sports, like we talk about trans women in sports, and then he would just go with the line, oh, but men and women are different. And it's like, okay, but when that's where your brain jumps to, you're revealing very, very clearly that you just view trans women as men. Like that's what you're saying. Like you don't realize that you're saying that, right?
But
But
it is
like
clear.
those are the wires that are crossed in your brain, and it's coming out in your language pretty clearly, right? And so you can tell when people are like that. And at that point, it's like, no, we just disagree on 100% of things because you can't even understand who I am as a person. And so what communication even is there at that point? You know?
Can you like you were talking a bit about it on Binder's show yesterday, but I really liked hearing this kind of like overarching thesis of how this is also deeply rooted within. I've always understood the patriarchal side of things, but you were talking about the white supremacist angle as well. So if you could elaborate upon that a little bit to give people a little bit of the sauce.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So this is okay. So white supremacists operate on uh narratives, right? Like I mean we all kind of operate on narratives in a lot of different ways, but there's a core narrative that is very central to the white supremacist ideology, and that is the narrative of sort of the suburban king in their castle, right, so to speak, where you have these violent cisgender heterosexual white men whose violence is justified because they use it to protect the sweet, innocent, and without agency cisgender heterosexual white women, and of course the children that they might have, who also are completely innocent and without agency. And that's their little bubble. But then you ask, okay, well, if these cishet men are protecting women and children, who are they protecting them from? And then obviously in comes every marginalized person, right? Where they've like invented this fantasy scenario where they're the king of their castle and women and children are their property that they must protect with violence, and their violence is justified because they're protecting their families from those evil marginalized folks, whether they be black and brown folks or queer folks or indigenous folks, like you name it, right? You know, they just create this like otherization, right? Which adds like a whole layer to this, because like if you actually really understand the way these things operate, then you actually recognize that black and brown folks like get degendered in a lot of ways and aren't given the same gender status that like cis het white folks are, right? Where like black women are denied agency in the same way that white women are, but at the same time, they're not granted the perceived innocence that white women are, right? White women are granted this like definitional perceived innocence that is just not afforded to black women, right? And so, in a lot of ways, under this white supremacist construction, they're creating completely different gender categories for black and brown folks, right? Same thing with like black men, right? Where like both white men and black men are seen as on some level violent, right? But of course white men, their violence is deserving and it's protecting, and then all of a sudden when it's black men, then it's like this whole like, oh
Hypersexually
whoa, oh my
charged
god,
and yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it turns into this whole entire thing, right? And so like that's why, like, you know, I mean, not to open a whole nother can of worms, but that's why it's kind of like silly to say that like black men have like male privilege, because like honestly in a white supremacist society, like black men don't get gendered in the same way as white men do. Well, so where do trans people fit in all of this? Well, trans people are really interesting, especially like particularly trans women, because we are very much seen as women. Like that's what like reactionaries don't really want to acknowledge, is that they do actually view us as
But
women, at least when it
it's
comes to,
very evident. It's like they give away
yeah,
the hand a little too hard.
yeah,
Because the
yeah.
misogyny is so ramped up. The misogyny, the control, the obsession, all of it. Oh yeah, I'm just sitting there. I'm like, oh my god, y'all are obsessed. You can see it. You're losing your family. Graham Linehan, you're divorced. You're all divorced. It's Crowder, fucking Elon Musk. You're all divorced over this. Like, you've lost your minds. Sorry.
Literally, no, because these people, like, they're so unbelievably misogynistic, right? Because, like, and that's why, like, I recommend this basically everywhere I go, is Julia Serrano's Whipping Girl. The reason why her book is called Whipping Girl, which A, by the way, you should read it. It's a fantastic book. And B, the reason why it's called Whipping Girl is, like, trans women are women that you can hit, right? They're literally like women who can be victimized by misogyny without the social constraints of people knowing that misogyny is bad, right? Like, so people at a baseline in society know that it's kind of bad to be misogynistic, so you probably shouldn't do it most of the time, except for when it's a trans woman. Then all of like the social norms of like misogyny being bad just goes out the window, because of course, right, with trans women, where we are denied agency over ourselves, we are also being cast as these, like, you know, sort of predatory at the same time, right?
Hypersexualized as
And
well.
so, yeah, and hypersexualized as well, because, and that's where it goes into this whole conversation about like femininity in and of itself is something that you're supposed to be ashamed of. Like, quite literally, cis women deal with this all the time, right? Any woman deals with this, which is the fact that you're expected to perform femininity, but you are also expected to be ashamed of having to perform femininity, right? The only reason cis women get to perform femininity without punishment is because they're baby factories for these cisgender men, right? That's how they're perceived under this system, right? Because of course, how can you be the king of your own castle if you don't have women and children as your property within the castle? Nobody wants to be the king of a castle that's alone.
Absolutely.
You know, and so it's all kind of wrapped up in this like white supremacist narrative. And so, well, if femininity then isn't like for baby making, then here, what's the only other purpose for femininity? Ah, yes, obviously sexuality. Clearly, femininity is just something that women perform for the sexual interest of men. That's clearly what femininity has always been, right? And so, that's why like trans women are like hypersexualized, because if you're a woman but you can't have babies, well, but you want to be feminine, then why else would you want to be feminine other than to just like, you know, attract men and be sexual for men? And so once again, you turn into this object without agency, where, you know, if you can't be a baby factory, then obviously you have to be just a sex object. And so all of these things kind of tie together, but there are like, and this is like the hyper concentrated form of it, but there are like more subtler forms where it's like, yeah, trans women are denied agency all the time. There's a reason why you'll see like a ton of trans women who literally will have like PhDs, but their primary source of income is from putting out spicy content on the internet. And it's because the very moment you're a trans woman in people's eyes, you have lost all femininity, because, or not femininity, you've lost all agency, because femininity is seen as something that's without agency. It's seen as something that is like hypersexual. It's seen as something that is unprofessional, right? All of these things, right? All of these things. Like, I mean, because think about it. Like, women can wear pantsuits in the workplace and be seen as professional, but could a man wear like a pencil skirt in the office and be seen as professional,
No.
right?
No.
And
I like,
so,
you couldn't even wear a kilt. I didn't get away with that, I think, in today's modern
yeah,
age. Yeah. No, that's also true.
yeah,
Like, I saw people in chat, they're like, this is blowing my mind. And I was like, yeah, this is actually a really interesting insight, because a lot of those concepts, I don't think about them in its totality, interconnected in the way you just explained it, where all of a sudden, once it is all laid before you, then yes, this all makes sense, and that connects to this, which then connects to this, and then all of a sudden, oh, that paints a much better understanding of why this is so hyper-focused in a lot of ways, right? Especially from the white supremacist angle, which you don't often think of, because I don't think of genderization, especially in specific ways, how it relates to people of different racialized categories. Like, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that does also make sense. Yeah, it clicks.
yeah. I mean, and that's where like I kind of like to use what I would call like the up the ladder, down the ladder approach to like analyzing like systems of oppression,
Okay.
because you realize if you look for core narratives and you sort of go up the ladder of like how, let's go like find like the broadest high level concept of like what is driving the way people are thinking, You start to realize, because the thing is, people who are not avowed white supremacists still believe the king of your own castle line, right?
Mhm.
There's a ton of people who believe in this like suburban mythology about the nuclear family and how they want to be the king of their own castle. They don't realize that that's something that was intentionally crafted as a white supremacist narrative. So they get all these ideas burrowed in their head that they kind of operate without realizing in ways that are incredibly racist or misogynistic and things like that, even though they're not saying the things, right? They're not saying the slurs. They're not doing the misogyny, right? They're not sexually harassing their coworkers. They're still engaging in misogyny and thinking misogynistic things. And they have these like sort of subtle patterns. And then you have to ask, like, where are these coming from? And like fundamentally, this is why it's so important to understand like gender as we understand it in like the Western world as a colonial construct, right?
Mhm.
There are plenty different ways to conceptualize gender outside of colonial constructs, but the way that the majority of people perceive gender and think of gender in the United States today is very much part of a colonial construct where there's notions of professionalism that are associated with gender. There's notions of like value and things like that that are associated with gender, and like all of these things like play a role. And it becomes like clear as day if you just roll back the clock a little bit, and look at like colonial states and the way that like colonized women were treated under these systems, and the way that like people were like especially when it comes to the notion of professionalism. Professionalism is a colonial construct. Quite literally, professionalism was created as a sort of cultural distinguishing factor between the people who are the colonizers managing the colony and the people who are subject to colonial rule. Like that quite literally is the origin of professionalism, right? Was to create sort of cultural barriers and then institutions around those cultural barriers to make sure that if somebody was coming from a community of people that were colonized, they would have to go through specific institutions of learning that not only would teach them specific skills, but would teach them the most important skill under this system, which is how to behave professionally, right? Which really just meant like adopting the language and mindset and things of the colonizers. And that like also ties into people like Ben Burgess, for example, who are this like, I'm just being an intellectual. And I think we need to be
Doing a callback.
disconnected from the issues, right? To do a callback to Ben Burgess, like when Ben Burgess engages in his particular type of very annoying intellectualism,
Mhm.
that is part of this colonial project as well, of like this idea that you need to be disconnected from issues in order to speak on them, right? Like it's just absurd on its face, but it is part of the sort of professionalist culture of colonialism. And like I know that professionalism, we've deviated a little bit from gender, but like it ties in really really well, because like professionalization is a big part of why certain groups of feminists kind of suck so hard, is because they've bought into the idea of professionalism. They haven't connected it to colonialism because they haven't connected their construction of gender to colonialism, so they don't realize that professionalism and colonial gender constructs are like intricately linked together, and that when women sort of like started entering the workplace, they started adopting this mindset of professionalism. If you're a particular type of feminist, you adopt this mindset of professionalism, not realizing that it's heavily gendered, and now all of a sudden like you have these people who get angry at people who embrace like bimbo feminism, right? Who are like, no, I don't want to perform intelligence in the way that men think that I should. I just
Mhm.
am an intelligent person. I also am just gonna be a dumb little slut if I feel like it, you know? Like,
Yeah,
and so but they get mad because that's unprofessional and don't
right.
want to unpack that. And so like that's one of those things where these things are all so deeply connected to each other within these like narratives, and you have to go up, find the high level narratives, and then go back down to see, okay, now how is this affecting this particular community? How is this affecting this particular community? And then you can come in with a deeper understanding. And I think that's where like solidarity rests really well, is when you do have an understanding of how I as like a white trans woman am going to experience oppression in a very different way than like a cisgender black woman would have, even though there's the same white supremacist narrative about gender that is driving both of our oppression. It's going to look different, but it's going to have shared components based on that core narrative. And so that is where it's super, super important in terms of building solidarity and understanding, because then you can actually start tackling these issues at their root. You can actually go after them at their core. And that's one of those things that, like, to me is just super, super super important to understand, because I think it's so critical, and it's one of the things that you miss when you just kind of look at like a lateral surface level analysis of how are different groups of people oppressed. And it's like, yes, we need to do that, but it's important that we go up to find what are the core narratives that are driving society, the that define people's like baseline assumptions about the world, and how do we address those core narratives and challenge them. And because like you know, that's one of the reasons why they get so upset about queer folks, right? That's one of the reasons why like the right wingers get so mad at people like me, like this evil communist polyamorous transgender woman, because I don't want to be a king of my castle, right? I think that femininity is really dope and that's how I'm going to live my life. So I'm undermining the idea that masculinity is inherently superior. And of course, by not being the king of my own castle and just being this, like, polyamorous queer person, I'm also not doing the baby factory thing or the nuclear family thing and
Right.
sort of undermining that central narrative that they depend on, because once again, you have to give the king their castle in order for them to feel like they need to protect something, in order for them to then have their justified violence that they then target towards marginalized people. If the whole nuclear family construct kind of collapses as like everybody should live this ideal, then obviously you have this big problem of like, well, wait, how do we get men to view women and children as property and turn into these violent reactionaries that terrorize marginalized people? It's just a
Right.
lot harder to do that when everybody's having a happy, fun time. Like,
Dancing.
yeah.
Can I ask what was your master's in, or your degree, or degrees, I should
Yeah,
say?
my master's degree was in biosecurity and biodefense. And for those are big fancy words. It's basically like, imagine public health plus like emergency management is kind of like the vibe, right? So
I thought you were gonna say like neo-colonialism and systems of oppression or something like that, based on that
no, my
speech. Okay.
undergraduate degree was in social sciences with a focus on anthropology,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Like,
There you go.
and so that's where I kind of got my groundwork for a lot of this, and then I've spent like just a ton of time reading, right? Like, because like I mean, this has just been like a hyperfixation for me, like learning about all this kinds of stuff. Like,
Mhm.
I love learning about different people around the world. I love learning about like little cultural practices. I love like because it gives you different ways to like view the world. Like, I don't know, it like, especially like as a rant, like unironically, I think some of what I learned about anthropology kind of is the reason why I kept my dead name, right? Like, so I don't really have a dead name, which is pretty rare. And it's just like reading about the way that different people around the world conceptualize gifts and like gift giving. And
Mhm.
and there were some things that just kind of resonated with me. I was like, oh damn, that's actually a really cool way to think about gifts. And then I kind of like, then reading about how different people conceptualize names, and I'm like, you know what? Like, and so I got to the point where I was like, I feel like my name was a gift, right? My name was a gift from my mom, and like I kind of want to keep that. I'm gonna tweak it a little bit, right? And
Mhm.
go with Benny as the shortening instead of like just Ben or Benjamin. But
Mhm.
like, and so all it is to say, I think there's a great value in learning anthropology. It's a great hyperfixation to have if you're autistic like I am.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, I also like I saw people in the chat having the same experiences as me, where it's just like it's just really neat because I have the same fixation, especially related to queer issues, and self exploration, trying to find out about a whole bunch of this stuff. And when you do get hyper fixated on it, you do get to do this connection. Like, and you just helped me with a handful of dots, by the way. But there's as soon as I learned a new thing, I was like, that explains it. That's why there's a difference in the way that we gender people who are racialized. And I never thought of it in that way, but that does serve the same kind of construct. You're right. That's cool. That's cool. People are asking for reading recommendations, by the way, based on everything you've been talking about.
Okay. The one big recommendation, obviously, Julia Serrano's Whipping Girl. I think that book is very, very good. I also recommend Caliban and the Witch with a big asterisk. Okay, big
Oh, okay.
asterisk for Caliban and the Witch. The person who wrote it is a TERF now. Okay,
Oh no.
which I
Should have.
kind of saw coming in the book. To be honest, there's a little bit of bioessentialism in the book,
Mm,
but it's really, really, I think, important for understanding how how misogyny actually got worse with the rise of industrial capitalism, which a lot of people are kind of surprised to hear that. Like, if you look at like gender inequality, like before capitalism and like the feudal era, you realize that the like most unequalness that there was actually among like the richest, wealthiest people, and like peasants were just kind of peasants. Like there was still like a lot of like gender inequality that existed among peasants, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it was under like industrial capitalism, because of course industrial capitalism that we have kind of like operates on this popular aristocracy, is kind of like how I define the culture, at least as it exists in the United States, where they do sell this idea of, oh, everybody's going to be the king of their own castle. And so a lot of the aristocratic mentalities about like gender and sexuality and things like that were sort of then pushed down onto like regular working class folks. And like you had a lot of women that were forced out of the workplace at the beginning of industrial capitalism, and you had a lot of professionalism being brought in, like, you know, for like corsetry, for example. Corsetry used to traditionally be like women made corsets for women, and it was a specific handcrafted like thing that you make for a person. Then comes industrial capitalism. All of a sudden, women are not allowed to make corsets. They've got to be made in factories, and you might have some women working in those factories, but they're going to be designed by men for the male gaze. And that's when, you know, you start having women keeling over because the corsets are like breaking their, you know, ribs and stuff like that. You know, because you let men take over the field. Same thing with midwifery, right? Same thing with midwifery, right? And so like, and it kind of talks a little bit about like colonial constructs of gender. There was another book that I read that talked a lot about it. I wish that I could remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it talked a lot about like gender as a colonial construct. I wish I had a good answer. David Graeber touches on this type of thing a lot, and I think like it's not like the main course of like any of his books, but it's like he has got nuggets in there of like how like, you know, colonialism and gender kind of like interplay a little bit, and so you kind of have to like suss it out from like long works, but the works are like worth it regardless. Like like genuinely, like David Graeber's works are just sort of like worth it regardless. But yeah, so those, I guess, the two big readings, like the Caliban of the Witch and Julius Verne's Whipping Girl.
I added Whipping Girl to my my reading list just now because I haven't actually read that. Sounds awesome. One of the last things I wanted to ask you in relation to the this whole saga, where do you personally see it going? I see so many people throwing out there that like, oh, this is a grift. Oh, this is just because she's pivoting. They're going to be signed to Rumble soon. That's what TYT is doing, blah, blah, blah. But to me, it feels more like two people aren't willing to back down and clearly are going down a pathway of their own kind of gender critical whatever. But the rest of the staff and company are all very, very vocal, especially all the other like affiliates and stuff, just being like, yeah, this is not me. Like, you know, I saw John Ladora was just like, I 100% support trans rights. I think you should have access to puberty blockers if you need them. I don't support these takes. That's it, you know.
I honestly have no idea where they're going. And like, to be honest, like my hot take is like, I don't really know if it matters, right?
Yeah,
Because
true.
like let's ask the big question, right? Let's ask the big question. Because I know everybody wants to speculate, because at a certain point it becomes like a, this is lore, right?
Of course.
How is this season gonna wrap? You know, what's gonna be the big season finale?
Yeah.
And like, I get it, right? I get like seeing the world through that lens. Like I totally understand.
Of content. Yeah.
Yeah. But ultimately, like, I kind of don't think that it matters. Like, because here's the thing. They are either going to continue to refuse to accept criticism and grow, and then they will force themselves into a right-wing pocket that they don't want to be in, right? And like they're kind of like, because they're on a path to like Richard Dawkinsing, or like shoot, what's that other guy? Like they're like Richard Dawkins, Steven Pinker, and like what's his face, the other guy that hangs out, Sam Harris.
Oh,
right?
Sam Harris, yeah.
Like, yeah.
Are you talking about the
like,
horsemen of the apocalypse? So all the new atheists turned out to be massive Islamophobic pieces of shit. Now they're all transphobes. It's wild.
Yeah, no, for real. So like,
how did that happen?
They're on a path, right?
Yeah.
They are on a path,
a journey
that could lead them to that
divorce,
right? And so they will either Grand Linehan like be alone and everybody will leave them, and they'll be like, what the hell is going on? Why have my wife and kids left me because I can't stop hyperfixating on trans people on the internet?
Yeah.
Like, or they will have like a come to Jesus moment and be like, maybe Jesse Singal sucks, right?
Yes.
Like,
and we hope for this. See, we stand. I'm totally down with that. That's awesome. Please.
Yeah.
I welcome that. Yeah.
For real, for real. So I don't know if this is a right-wing grift. I don't know if this is just them being too proud to admit that they were wrong about something.
But a lot of
Something.
things.
I have no idea. I genuinely have no idea.
You're
And
right.
like,
It,
to
it
be
doesn't matter
honest,
though. At the end of the day,
yeah,
yeah, you're right. Because like the damage is being done. I saw the Fox News headline the other day where it's like leftist host says that this causes irreparable harm to do puberty blockers. I was like, fuck, this is what I knew would happen. Because this is what they always do. They take that one quote and then now they use it to pass legislation. It's gonna be Jesse Singal of all people. He's been fucking referenced to pass anti-trans legislation before, and it's like, hey, this is not coming from the extreme right. This is not Christian fascist. This is not fucking, you know, a dictator or anything like that. This is apparently a writer for the Atlantic. You know, they're pretty progressive. What do you think? You know?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No,
Brutal.
and that's actually like, this is like, I guess the one big thing that I want to say is like, fundamentally right now when it comes to transphobes spreading misinformation and like the level of dangerous that they are, I do unironically think that Cenk and Anna are some of the most harmful people spreading transphobic stuff right now, specifically because they are telling their audience of people who would otherwise be allies that the smart strategy is to throw trans people under the bus. That the smart strategy is to distance yourself from
Thank you.
trans people at the time where trans people are most being threatened. And so that to me actually makes them more dangerous than people like Matt Walsh, because Matt Walsh, like his followers of unhinged freaks, were always going to be exactly that, right? Like, but Anna and Cenk are actively taking people who would otherwise be supportive and literally sending them to my comments section to harass me, right? Like, not to make it personal, but like,
No, but that
because
like
they're doing it
their,
to plenty of trans people. Like, you know
because
what I mean?
that's
Like,
the activism now. That's what people are now being like, you know what, they're right. Jake and Anna have done so much for trans people. How dare you? How dare you throw 19 out of 20 good takes under the bus because of the one thing, you know? Yeah, I'm sorry. That sucks. That's brutal. Well, it's just like, it's what a waste of well-to-do lefties who otherwise wouldn't have spent 10 minutes of their day being like, I gotta give Bennie a piece of my mind. She's so wrong about this. What a traitor you are. You know, like, fuck that noise. You could have been, you know, trying to push back against legislation or something. I don't know.
yeah,
Sucks.
for real. And yeah, like, and at the end of the day, look, here's like to everybody in chat. If you don't know about trans people in sports, hormones or something, accept the fact that you're not a doctor or a sports expert and just shut up.
That's a
Clean
good
up your
PSA.
room.
Hey, you know what? I'm gonna clip that, and then I'll add like da da da. It'll like have the whole "the more you know" thing. I have that. Wait, hold on. I can do that. Yes. You probably can't see this right now. "The more you know" is playing on screen on the actual stream. We did it. Where can people find you? Where can people subscribe to you? Where can people join your Patreon? Where can people get the experience now that they can't get it on TYT?
Yeah. So Benny.gay on Twitch, at Benny.gay on Blue Sky, patreon.com/Benny4. And there are other links as well. I don't know. I have a link tree that you can find.
I can't thank you enough for this. Honestly, it was not only great hearing the behind the scenes stories, but more importantly, I really liked your like very advanced 9,000 IQ brain powers when it comes to talking about gender theory. Like I genuinely learned a lot. It was fascinating.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I can do that. It's honestly, it's genuinely a fun topic, for me at least. So
Everyone, go check out Benny.gay. Thank you so much for coming on the stream. Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form, available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
Thank you kindly to our Lord and Saviors Peyton L. Just and Xander Corvus. Without you, we are nothing. And now, a shout out to our Knights of the Square Table. Amazing Flesh, Anna Loves Riley, Adrian McCarthy, DM Rivera, Doug Cady, Everything Important, Hegbard Celine, Izzy Solidarity, Lamidia Panza, Matthew Scarborough, Multimondi, Nettle, Omni, Peanut Butter Blonde, Political Papi, Quiet 185, Rachel K, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Kubi, Cernicus, Spinach Monster, Stellar Vision, Sebastian Dimmel, Thomas, Trevbot EXE, Lucidry, Words Greenwood, Cheryl Alvarez, Tony Perkins, Thomas, O'Pecker, Travis McClinton, and Victoria Bell. Thank you so much. And a huge shout out to all the other people who make this entire show possible. Without you, it would not exist. If you can support us, please go to patreon.com/theserfs, and even $1 can help unlock all of the little goodies and help make this show entirely possible.